Servus Männer, it's Red Pill Germany again. Today I want to explain to you why I think that Donald Trump is the better president for the United States, but also for Germany and for Europe. In my last video about the US election, I talked more about what happened during the first term in the last years. Today I want to look at what is ahead of us. And I think it is very clear that Trump is the better candidate, the better president compared to Biden and Kamala Harris. Now, I have a US perspective and also a German perspective. Now, my perspective is of course German, but I lived in the US, I worked there, and I still know what kind of people I got along with back there and what kind of people I didn't get along with back in the day. Now, for some mysterious reason, I got along really great with technicians and engineers and scientists from the Midwest. Must be genetic, I guess. And already back then, there were some proto-woke people from California or from the East Coast who seemed to be strangely obsessed with the great achievements of my ancestors, but despite all that, I just didn't get along with them very well. I guess just culturally there was not much common ground and ultimately conflicting interests, I assume. So I still have a lot of good friends in the United States and I wish them well, and I don't want the United States to collapse or to be reduced to a third world banana republic. Or also, I do not want the US to be destabilized. I say these things so clearly because a lot of Germans actually do want that. They are in fact barely hiding it. When they read the news about what is going on in many cities in the United States, they cannot even hide their glee and their joy over the problems and the many conflicts that are happening right now on the streets of US American cities. It goes without saying that we in Europe have our own fair share of problems at the moment, and there is no reason to point fingers at other people, but these European leftists just love it when they see the US in trouble. I mentioned this kind of strange anti-Americanism, especially on the European left, a couple of times. So I think it is pretty much self-explanatory why Donald Trump is the better president for the United States. Of course, he's not perfect, but it cannot be denied that there was a lot less military misadventure all over the world under Donald Trump as compared to Clinton, Bush, Obama, and Biden as vice president also, of course. I think most Americans, especially those who are in the military or who have family members in the military, they are really sick and tired of playing world police and to taking these huge risks for military action that in the end don't serve the American people. So foreign policy and military interventions are really a big point, I think. As I mentioned before, the whole economic issue when it comes to Green New Deal, carbon tax, fossil fuels, and so on, here it is very clear that these measures all just serve the purpose of taxing the production process, taxing productive people, and redistributing that money mostly to foreign powers or to grow the government. This is what has been done in Germany, and I'm sure that this is what the Democrats also have in mind for the USA. I also briefly want to mention again that these green industry jobs or these green energy jobs do not exist. They don't exist in Germany and they won't exist in the United States. This is just a propaganda lie. I feel very strongly also about bringing back manufacturing to the United States, because this is really an issue where both the US and Europe in fact win. If you have a big country like that, you cannot live from banking or from selling insurance alone. You need agriculture, you need mining, you need production, you need a manufacturing industry. You need to be a country, and you have to become a country again, that makes things, good things, and a lot of things. Under Trump, I think America has turned around and is already on the path to reclaiming their manufacturing sector. Of course, it was never gone, but it was really diminishing under previous administrations. This brings about a lot of good jobs, career jobs, high-paid jobs, and also that creates upward mobility because engineers and technicians are the classic career path that lifts people out of poverty or a low-income working class lifestyle. Nothing creates more upward mobility in a society than a manufacturing sector, a strong manufacturing industry. And why does Germany and Europe profit from that? Well, that's very easy. If the USA are ramping up their production, their manufacturing capacity, then German companies profit from that because we are providing a lot of the goods and services that are also needed in the production process. Lots of plant equipment, lots of specialized tools and processes are coming from Germany. We are not the only people who can do that, but statistically on average, whenever a Western country especially is investing in their manufacturing sector, our industry and especially our Mittelstand always gets a chunk of this business. We just profit more from a capacity increase in the US than we would from a capacity increase in China, for example. So now we are already looking at things from the European perspective, which is much more interesting because that gets covered much less, I think. The advantages and the problems in the US get covered a lot. Many people talk about it, but what is really at stake for Europe from our perspective? Well, there is the obvious battle over NATO. The Americans want us to pay more for our military, for our own defense, and I couldn't agree more. Of course, I said that Trump and the US administrations falsely accuse us of not keeping our promises or sticking to the contracts, which is actually a technicality, as I already said back then. The fact remains, though, that I always said that I want a strong German military. I want the US military out of Germany, and I want Germany to invest heavily in its own military. But not because Trump says so, and not to be a mercenary force for the handlers of the Western world, but I would like a strong German military that will be used for German interests and for the protection of Germany. In a European framework, of course, with our neighbors and partners, we must organize continental defenses all on our own, or at least take up a much larger chunk of the work here and not leave everything to the US. That is for sure, but first and foremost, I want them out of my country. So from my perspective, there should not be a conflict. Every German patriot should want to build up a stronger German military. I think the conflict arises then when the US want to tell us what we are doing with this military. I don't want an intervention type army that goes on little adventures outside of the borders of Europe. I do not want a global mercenary force. I want a continental defense force. And also the point I mentioned earlier that Trump doesn't tend to use the military so much and so often as previous presidents did. I think especially that is good for Europe, because whenever NATO and the Americans were doing these things in our backyard or in our neighborhood, let's say, which is Northern Africa and the Middle East, of course, it was always bad for us, because we had to, in a way of speaking, pick up the pieces and deal with the fallout that these military misadventures caused. So that is another very important reason why a Trump administration is actually better for Europe than something like Bush or Obama or Clinton. So the mainstream media in the US and also in Germany, also in Europe, they are of course convinced that Joe Biden will definitely win. All the news that we hear about the polls are very one-sided, and they were also wrong in 2016. I have no idea if they will be wrong again in 2020, but I just want to say, even though at the moment it seems as if everybody in Europe would be against Donald Trump and a lot of things you hear out of Europe right now are really nasty, Always remember that the media landscape in Europe is pretty much like that one in the US, with a huge left-leaning public broadcasting bloc in many countries, such as the UK and in Germany. And also, we don't have an equivalent to Fox News. In Germany, there just is no conservative-leaning mainstream cable news network or even a conservative bigger newspaper. It doesn't exist. So I'm not talking about red-pilled newspapers here. I'm just saying even these Fox News-like centrist conservatives, even that doesn't exist in Germany. So don't be surprised if everything you hear out of Europe is really left-winged and really progressive. So for the time being, I want to leave it at that, and I will be seeing tomorrow how it goes. Maybe we already see a clear decision on election day, but maybe the result will not be that clear, and maybe the courts even get involved, and there will be a huge disagreement about the election process and who actually won in which state. This year it might become very interesting, and I hope not nasty, but there could definitely be a lot of trouble. I hope everybody in the United States has prepared for that. I hope you get along well with your neighbors and that you took precautions for your families and your community's safety. Of course, we should hope for the best, but I would want to be prepared if I were in the US right now. Servus, Kameraden.